Good afternoon. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Around the Pit. Did Coffee with Toffees yesterday. Today is Around the Pit. Excited to be here to bring you guys a new episode. I know it's been a little while since we've been back. Easter, birthdays, everything seems to get in the way, but we're here. We're now, and it's going to be fun. Now, a big shout out to our sponsors. The folks over at Razer and Asus Republic of Gamers have both made this show possible with their generous technology support. And a really big shout out to our patron saints over at Pro Build Systems who built the computer from scratch and have provided all the support needed to keep the show running and broadcast it to you so you can watch it anywhere you are. So without them, the show wouldn't go. So a big shout out. Make sure that you send them your business when you need to be doing so. I'm Toffees. You can find me at Toffees TV or here on Sundays with new episodes of Around the Pit, or you can check me out on Wednesdays on my new show, True Sight, over on the Daily Dot. Where we produce and create some of the best interviews and content that I think you can find out there in Dota right now. Enough about me. Let's talk about our guests. First up on your left and my right is going to be David Dillon, or as you probably know him, Blaze Casting. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing really well, man. I'm looking forward to a nice bout around the pit. I mean, obviously, you got those contests, you get the Aegis, you walk away. I'm ready to go ahead and go for the high ground. So I think it'll be fun. We got some good topics tonight, so it should be enjoyable.
Winning is fun. Blaze pushing for the high ground. You look a little bit sick right now, so we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, I do have some allergies. Spring has finally sprung, so it's been an all-day thing, but hopefully I'll be able to get through it.
Hopefully it's not too terrible. That said, let's move on to our second guest. Right in the middle is going to be none other than, well, he goes by Ryuu Dota now, but in my heart, he'll always be Ryuu Uberus. Someone who's going to Star Ladder in 3 or 4 days, so glad you could stop by the show. How are you doing today, Ryuu?
I'm good. It's not going to be fun beating Blaze since he's a handicap now. He's sick around the pit, so I'm gonna feel bad taking this, whatever it is, this challenge or debate or whatever we're doing here, gossiping girls, or this should be fun though. I'm glad to be here.
It will be fun. I like that you guys both have the same professional headsets, whereas we're going to our next guest, Jack Chen, Korean Barbecue. You may know him, have seen him. He does the Dot Pro show over on Dot P. He also ran Dota FM for a while and is the translator, Shanghai, Frankfurt, and presumably going forward, as he's been doing a great job out there. I think he even stepped in and did some interviews after James got fired. How are you doing today, Jack?
Really good. I don't have the same headset as my other guests here, but I've got a microphone a little bit next to me. So yeah, I'm excited to get this going.
All right, so it should be a lot of fun, guys. Let's get the first. Before I put the topics up on the clock, I do want to let you guys know that there are rules to this game. It's not just all willy-nilly, do what you will, but the rules are relatively simple. Basically, I assign points throughout the match based on good ideas, not bad ideas, or just a willingness to get out there and speak your mind. The one who gets the most points at the end of the game wins the Aegis. The Aegis sits behind me, but it means that at any point you can use that for future shows to bring yourself back to life. Jump right back in to challenge somebody you want to take on. Other things to know is just like Roche, the topics only have a couple of minutes. So we run an 8-minute clock. We have a little bit of wiggle room on the respawn for the next topic, but generally you see us run about 8 minutes. At the end of a topic, this sound goes off. And that means that whether you're talking, dancing, or sitting still, it's time to stop what you're doing and move on to the next thing. So basically the main rule is don't talk over the buzzer. Do you guys have any questions or concerns before we start?
Good to go.
All right, and just a reminder, everyone seems to forget we're on the show, but you do have a 1-minute soapbox to use at your will to speak about anything that you want. So at any time during the show, each person can declare a 1-minute soapbox, take it over, and talk about whatever they like.
Is that each round? Each round?
It is for the entire show. You get one-minute soapbox, and then at the end of the show, the winner of the Aegis gets an additional 1 minute where none of us can interrupt and they can talk about anything that they want. And to tell you, literally anything. I think 1 week we actually had Swindles go on a Bernie Sanders rant for a full minute. So that 1 minute is open and available for anything that you want. Also, you can win points during your sandbox or your soapbox, so be aware of that. All right, let's get started. The first topic on the clock, the one that a lot of folks wanted to talk about right out of the gate, is one that I was not surprised. The topic name is Civil War, and some folks said, what is this about? What is the Civil War? This is basically it. there was a huge shuffle change, right? Leading up into the last tournament, Dota Pit, it was dead quiet and nobody making noise about shuffles, especially in North America. Not a lot going on in the West. And then Dota Pit ended, boom, crack, things went crazy. Secret announced some roster changes that affected EG off guard. EG then had to yank some players from other teams. So let's talk about this shuffle. Let's talk about who came out on top, specifically in North America, and your thoughts about the 5-day alert that EG got to finding new players.
All right. Well, I'll start it off. I was hoping Toffees would direct one of us first, but my thoughts on it are, who can you classify as a North American team now? That was my biggest concern when this all came through, is you have 4 people coming in from the European side onto Digital Chaos, and I personally don't like that, because what I wanted to happen is Valve maybe implementing a rule where you could have, say after 3 months of them playing in the European scene and scrimming there, but they want to be in a North American team, then after that grind there, they can start being that team. Like Complexity already established themselves, even though they had 3 Europeans. I would consider them now North American, though, even though they have 3 Europeans, 2 NA, because they've established themselves for a long enough time. And I would really like that for Digital Chaos too, not so they're instantly North American, because I just don't like that.
Okay, so do you have a fear that people are going to be transitioning, that this might open the gates to back and forth, coming and being an American team for 6 months, that you can get an easier qualifier road? Or you think it just gives you more pride to know that the team's made up of folks who have committed themselves to the region?
Well, to me, it just sounds like an LG kind of esh thing, where they're going to be constantly, going to probably go back to their own countries after, 6 months or a year if it doesn't work out. And I don't think they're going to stay committed. So that's my biggest problem, is commitment. And I don't think they're going to stay committed.
The big thing for me is the advancement of the region as a whole. And the way to look at that is simply, what servers do they play on, when they scrim, and how actively are they scrimming the teams that they are representing. And the big deal for me was, if Digital Chaos moved to like East Coast, near DC or something like that, and just had a quick access to the European servers, low ping there, they would just be scrimming European teams. They would be building up their prior scene without bringing anything over to North America. Because they're located in Arizona, they're almost always going to be scrimming US East. I know that they're scrimming American teams. So that is the important thing for me. Sure, a delay period would be nice, at least a month of building up the scene that they're representing. But overall, I don't care about nationality. As long as location equals scrims in that location and building up that region, that's what's important, because that's going to allow every team that they go up against to be that much stronger and bring that much more to the game. So overall, if you're going to build up the scene, if you want to just jump over to SCA or America as a Chinese or European team and try to find a better path to the international tournament, you're still going to have to fight all the international teams. Right. So fight where you think you're going to be the strongest and where you can make the most difference.
Okay. Interesting.
I liked his topic about the Arizona thing, where they're going to constantly be scrimming the teams. But I still don't agree, like bringing over like 5 Chinese to America.
Well, it really just like Team Tinker did this before. They were in Canada and they just scribbed Europe, and it didn't do anything for America.
They flopped. That was
they just
showed like great talent together.
Exploded in a very short period of time. So I hope that DC is able to find some success, is able to go the distance, is able to have this not just for the Manila Major and for TI, which they're essentially locked in for, but also the next major thereafter. So I feel like the fact that DC still have a team rather than just Aoi, Bulba, and 1437 piecing out and leaving it as a completely just dead sector, I feel like that actually improves things, and actually was a net positive for North American Dota, where at the beginning it just looked like straight up Secret were going to take Arteezy and Universe, taking massive talent out of the scene, bringing them to Europe, and it just hurting the North American scene overall and the North American progression of all of EG's competitors, as well as EG itself. Now we get to see 5 players playing on American soil, scrimming American teams, and that's really what it comes down to for me and for most of their competitors.
I still want to see, like you're saying, I want to see no more Complexity and no more EG in my top 2. I want to see a new star, a new team. Yes. And like you said, if it has to be Digital Chaos, I don't care if you're international or whatever, your nationality, it doesn't matter to me as well. I just want to see good Dota, and I just want to make sure everything is fair for all the teams And as you said, they're going to be scrimming all the time in this region. So that is what I want to see. That is how it is.
So let me ask you guys this, and maybe Jack can sound off on this one. It seems like when teams, especially North American regional teams, move to a roster that is largely not North American in terms of residency, people get angry about that or seem to maybe say they're not supposed to be a North American team anymore. In other sports, if you look at soccer, for instance, the amount of players who play for a team that have the nationality where the team's located is very small compared to the ones who do, and no one seems to care. It's not uncommon to see a large portion of your team imported from other countries, yet the team is still English or part of the English league. Why do you think it is such a big deal in Dota that we want to see regional players on teams that are regionally based instead of just saying, well, that's where the brand is, so that's where the team is?
I think regional rivalries really do matter. They're really just a source of kind of pride. And, you see Swindle go on stage at Shanghai and talk about the regions, and you see people, for example, casters and analysts sometimes rip NA Dota, for example, for where it is. And that does matter to people. It's not, people want to take pride in the region that they're in. And for example, with this Chinese situation at Shanghai, people are very upset about that. If you're Chinese, it's like a big deal to you. So I think that's definitely part of it. And we've had this happen in other games as well. I think it's really interesting that in this era of like esports and games, you have a situation where boundaries are more fluid and more nebulous than ever before. So for example, in StarCraft, I don't know if any of you followed or played it, but you also had this like attempt at region locking, having people qualify from regions. And what happened with that, like all the Koreans basically diffused out of Korea and people went to other regions as well, Europe or North America to play. So as long as you have, I like David's suggestion of having them commit to that region, kind of like LGD, and to be considered a part of it. And hopefully you do raise the local level of competition. We do have new teams coming up and benefiting from that.
I think that's the distinction, and that's what's important, because what happened in StarCraft was the Koreans would go to the regions, but they didn't do anything in terms of practicing with them. They practiced with Koreans, they practiced with one another. They did not bother with anything that they considered the tier 2. And as a result, it was still just Korean StarCraft all day long. It wasn't just a nationalistic capability. It was straight up, they refused to let any of the foreigners into their game, even though they were the foreigners in the region locks.
Okay. Makes sense. Any last thoughts on? Actually, no, I'm gonna ask this: which team, and we'll say North American teams, based on who traditionally has been a North American regional team, or who plays here or has moved players here recently. Which ones do you think came out on top of this shuffle? Is EG still the premier NA team? Is Complexity in a position to take that over? Is DC in the mix, or maybe Fire, or some of these other teams that have been sort of emerging lately?
So what I would have to say is that Complexity wins by default by the fact that they didn't have to shuffle, by the fact they didn't have to change their players. They get to hold on to their stability, their synergy. Everything they've been building up over recent months is going to still be there. From there, EG looks extremely strong. And after that, like third in North America, I'm actually looking at another team that didn't really have any changes in Shazam. So Fluff, they actually did end up, if you look at the official site, they end up switching the Fire roster kind of last minute. Based on how things broke down with, I think that one of the other Evernova squads or something. But they have a very fresh new team as well, and it's not convincingly stronger than any of the others. So those would be my top 3.
Okay.
I'd say who's my strongest right now is still probably be EG, just because the fact that you have this team that's been a premier team for the last, 2, almost 3 years here, where they've held everything in top just because of PPD. And I think he'll be able to still contribute the most to the team. But I agree with Complexity still grinding it out. They'll always be that next contender for me. And then, like you said, Shazam is definitely that team that is right up there. It's going to come between, him or them and Digital Chaos for me. Obviously, that team has so much talent, and it's going to be them fighting for third place. And then I could see both of those teams maybe making the next step. And we're just going to have to see. The next patch is just going to be everything in Dota right now. I mean, we have so many questions, like No Diggity coming out. MVP, are they still going to be the best team? Like in Korea, they could be the best team in the world soon. But everything changes in Dota. Like Alliance, we saw them. What happened for a whole year? I mean, so we'll have to see.
Okay. Jack?
For me, it's still complexity right now, just because they have the fewest question marks and they do have the most continuity. I mean, they immediately locked in after Shanghai. They seem to be getting better and better with each event. If you look at, say, from MDL to the Shanghai Major, they keep getting better. They have a good leadership structure. They have a unique system in that they have 2 pairs of brothers on the team. And you talk about, it's hard to gauge from the outside what internal struggles or issues are like with teams, but you have to believe that if you have brothers and blood relations in the team, it does make things a bit better. So I like the direction that team is headed and the confidence that they have. And for Evil Geniuses, I mean, I think they have a lot of potential, and but there's a lot of question marks, not just with the return of Aoi and such, but hey, he's playing a different position now, right? So he's going to carry, which he played in the past with Dignitas, but how is that going to work draft-wise? You have Bulba stepping in to fill Universe's very large shoes, and it's going to be different play styles, so there's going to be adjustments.
I think it's going to be way better for AUI now, because his problem was him causing a lot of stress on PPD, and now PPD is going to be leading the team. He's no longer going to be playing support. He's going to be just farming the whole entire game. He's not going to be a shot caller, and that's why I think EG are going to do so much better than they had all the problems at team.
Well, it's definitely possible that dynamic shifts because they're not co-supports, but I got to say, just having done some captaining, that the carrier is still going to bitch about the draft. Like,
they will still complain.
And there's that problem. It's still something that Curtis has to work on.
So let me ask you this, guys. Universe and Sam Bulba. In 2015, Universe did an interview where he said, "I like Bulba, but I would destroy him in a 1 versus 1." Basically, referencing their positions as offlaners. Do you think that stands now, or who do you think in this sort of new EG secret offlane throwdown stands ahead, Universe or Bulba?
I mean, I think Universe is one of the best offliners in the entire world. So
you can't question that either.
No matter how strategic Bulba thinks, Universe is just too damn good.
I mean, it doesn't even matter about 1v1 in my mind at all. I could see what if Bulba like 3-0s him in lane. It doesn't matter. Universe is just the stock standard. Like, he'll carry his team in the later game, and that's what you want in your off lane. I mean, he sets up everything in the mid game, the late game. It's just all around. Like, even like I said, if he loses that 1v1, it doesn't matter for me, because he carries in the late game.
The Chinese regard Universe as the best player in the world for a lot of different reasons, maybe because of TI as well, but obviously, analysts have a lot more insight into this. So I've heard Nahaz say, for example, Universe is the type of player that you can kind of just leave out there on anything, and he'll always manage to get what he needs. I'm not sure if that's the case for Bulba to the same extent, and maybe that frees you up in terms of drafting as well. So.
Okay. Good, interesting thoughts on that. I like it. Let me ask you this. This is a simple yes or no. We'll go right down the line. Complexity joined Dota, I think, just over a year ago or so, if I remember correctly. Maybe a little more than that at this point. And they came in with this roster out of Heroes of New Earth, and a lot of us were sort of skeptical about where Complexity was going to go. If I had asked you a year and a half ago, will Complexity be in a discussion as #1 North America over Evil Geniuses, do you think that you would have said yes or no at that time?
Just one more
I said
answer.
no.
Explain it.
Yeah, just when they first joined, did you think that they'd ever rival EG for first place? And I mean, that's our
Do we
discussion
say
right
yes,
now.
no, and explain it, and who's answering first, or?
All right, let's say yes, no, and give me an explanation if you want. Blaze, what do you think?
I think absolutely. Somebody has to contest Evil Geniuses. I mean, that's something that we look back on last year, and it was a very distinguished Tier 1, and then like even Tier 1.5 was empty because of how much higher above EG was than everybody else. Someone's got to give, someone's got to close that gap, and I think Complexity was one of the names that could have been added to that discussion. I mean, so lots of people love to stipulate Han Trash and stuff like that,
Right.
but skills transfer over very clearly from game to game, and I do feel like they had the potential, but if you advocate for that, you're still going to get flamed. Like, I mean, come on.
What'd you think, Ryu?
I want to say yes and no, but I'm going to just say no, because whereas you would think Evil Geniuses is the best team, and
Right.
thinking that they would still be overtaken here, I would say no to that question. But seeing them as a top, 2, I could see that but overtaking EG, no.
Okay. Jack?
I probably would have gone with no as well, just because of how strong the EG roster was, and they started putting things together really after DAC. They had a period of instability for a couple of years, but once they seemed to find their captain, once they seemed to find their groove, it really looked like they were pretty untouchable as far as NA went. And David brought up something really interesting with the Han thing, because now you look at some of the players in Dota 2 who are having a lot of success with that Han background, and that maybe people didn't expect that because of, as he mentioned, the whole Han trash label, or not respecting those players, or thinking that they're playing maybe a different or inferior game because they couldn't cut it in Dota. That was certainly the popular perception for some people, but that's proven very patently to be false. You look at a lot of these players who have come over from that Fnatic squad. You're talking about No-Tail, PPD, obviously with the Han background, and now Swindle, and a lot of other players too. I'm sure I'm leaving out a lot of names. So certainly they've proven that it does translate. And Swindle said this morning, just casting the finals of the qualifier for Epicenter, that this is a patch and meta right now that fits very well for Han players. So I'm glad that that's happening and that they've proven that it does translate.
Absolutely. They also brought over something that we didn't see a lot of, which was things like team houses and work ethic or grind ethic, which I think was sort of new to the scene when they showed up. Interesting. Cool to have the conversation, I think, but let's move on to the next round. And this is one that I think matters a little bit more. Well, it matters to all of us, but I think is very pertinent for one of us as he's flying out to this event, and it is Jacob's Ladder. So for Jacob's Ladder, we're going to talk a little bit about Star Ladder I-League Invitational coming up next week. It is, to me, an interesting tournament because I had this discussion with you a little bit earlier, Ryuu, where I was like, well, I don't know that any of the teams that are going are super duper relevant, and I take that back a little bit in the sense of there are some good teams there, but the invites don't seem as, some of the best teams in the world aren't going. EG's not going to be there. Secret's not going to be there. New VG is not going to be there. So tell me about this tournament in the sense of why are there only 8 teams? Which of them really matter? And why is this tournament important right now?
I mean, you have 2 of the top 4 at the major there, Liquid and MVP. So I think this is already a premier tournament just by looking at that. But I want to get into some topic later, like you talked about the North Americans, why there's nothing there, but I'll keep that for later. But going back to the Team Liquid here and the MVP, that's enough to make the top tournament here. And I just want to say that it's going to be interesting to see how this region kind of, or this works out, right? This might be the last chance we get to see for this patch and see who gets to dominate it and see who can be that top dog. And the biggest concern for me is going to be, can OG get back in top shape? Because I have a very unique idea that I want to share with you guys right now. So you know how the invite system kind of goes for the major, right? You have the top 4 or 6 teams get invited to the next major. Well, how about we do it where you're the top 2 teams from the first major automatically get invited to the third one if they finish top 8. So I'm not sure if you guys will agree with that or not, but that's something to bring up. And then maybe the top 4 from the 4th major will go, but then and then so on and so repeat.
So to clarify, so you're saying, like, for instance, if OG wins the first major and finishes in the top 8, maybe 8th place in the second major, they should still get a direct invite to the third major.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I say. Yes.
That's how I say. All right.
I agree.
What do you guys think of that system?
I mean, there's a lot of systems that could be put in place. I feel like the biggest problem with the invite system as a whole is clarity, is the fact that we clearly don't have any formula. I think maybe that's in part to make it so that the teams can't just sit around and be fully confident in their invites unless they were in the top 2 at a major or at TI. But I feel like this scene could still greatly benefit from knowing how things influence, especially going into the roster locks, knowing what a team is expected to get out of it. And of course, just make sure that the intermediary tournaments have value, because with the current major system, every single tournament in between is evaluated for not only its teams, but its timing. And is it too close to one of the majors? Is it too far away from one of the majors? Will it be overshadowed by other events? And it's not just booking arena anymore. It used to be, as long as you could get it a few months in advance, book the arena, you're good to go. Now it is conflicted with 4 Valve-based events. It is trying to have primary viewership with certain demographics due to which teams are playing, and most importantly, getting those teams interested. The $100,000 prize pool of the Star Ladder Invitational will get some teams interested, and the fact that they only had to play a week for the qualifier, for the European qualifier, as well as plenty of them getting direct invites, like, I feel like it's not meant to be like a full-scale Star Ladder LAN. It's saying, hey, we want to give you guys an opportunity to show you what you can do between Shanghai and Manila, and it's going to be a good trip to Kiev. I think it'll be very competitive Dota. And I think that we'll still get to see a lot of good stuff. I mean, we got to see some really great surprises out of MVP Phoenix before. Vici Game Reborn is one of the better looking teams after the Chinese shuffle. So, like, I feel like there's going to be a pretty active dynamic throughout I mean, it's a brief tournament, but it's going to be active for what it's trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
As far as Star Ladder goes, yeah, I think what you mentioned there near the end, I'm really curious to see how the two Chinese teams will perform, in this case, LGD and Vici Reborn. So obviously Vici Reborn is FY's new team, and they have Yang, who played for eHome, I believe, at TI5. And they're restructured. They've been looking really strong so far coming out of, they won the H Cup to get into this tournament. They've been doing very well domestically. I think they were in the finals of the Manila qualifier as well for ESL 1 Manila. So. And finally, of course, LGD adding Aggressive and Xiao back to the roster. So I think this is important for me because the Chinese scene is really in a state of flux after the what happened in Shanghai, because they have to be worrying about their direct invites and what's going to happen next. So there aren't that many opportunities for them to prove themselves against other international teams. And this goes back to what you were saying about the whole selection process. It is such a subjective thing because how do you measure who's strong in each region, who's playing against who without these kind of international tournaments, or how would you make those determinations? So in this case, it's very important for these Chinese teams to distinguish themselves so that they can maybe try to get that invite. Otherwise, it's going to be a very crowded qualifier for the Manila Major.
Now, Ryuu alluded to something a minute ago, and I want to make sure that we cover this for while we have time. And you just brought it up. There's Chinese teams, there's SEA teams, there's CIS teams. There's not one North or South American team on the roster. Is that because of viewership, like Blaze brought up? Because does that sync with the fact that Chinese teams are there? Why is it that North America, South America is not represented at this tournament?
It really comes down to me if they invited Complexity and EG. I don't know for sure, but I would assume they did invite Complexity and Evil Geniuses. If they did and those were declined because these guys feel confident in their invites and don't feel like going to Kiev and want to practice up, train up for Manila, etc., then that's completely understandable. That's from both sides. And it just comes down to whether or not those invites happen. Because everybody below those two was in chaos, shuffling back and forth. Nobody knew what was going to happen there. So I feel like with all that being considered, there should have been a North American team if a North American team felt hungry for it. But the two big ones that I'm looking at really didn't have enough incentive. So it might have just been kind of a mutually decided factor where, yeah, we get a little bit less viewership on the North American front, but obviously they're still getting a lot from the European scene and a lot of CIS viewers.
If you invite MVP Phoenix, you have to invite another team. You're saying, hey, SEA region is more important than North America. That's a no-go. So like Blaze is saying, they've had to invited somebody and they just had to say, no, this tournament's not worth it, as he was saying. And they probably just moved on from there and just like say, now we're just going to get up some team here in the CIS region, which it's either what? I think it's Navi probably or something.
Right.
As their, because I think OG and Virtus Pro are both a little, well, obviously OG is really stronger, and then Virtus Pro I think a little bit stronger than Navi. They're probably neck and neck, so it's going to be interesting to see who they invited for that last spot there for VG getting the replacement. But I think another thing to note in this tournament is going to be how Navi and Alliance do, because Navi is one of those teams that doesn't get invited to anything anymore because they have to prove it. And if you have to win a tournament again, if you're Navi or a Navi fan, because there's just no hope left at times, and there's no next step. You're always going into qualifiers, and you're not necessarily qualifying for anything right now. You're hoping you get some invites to these big tournaments and hoping you can do something. As well as for Alliance, they were invited to the majors over Liquid. Like that was the biggest what in everybody's mind, or at least mine, and they need to prove now, Alliance, that it's still their patch. And if they don't win anything, I'm very worried for them coming up to this next invite for the majors and for the next, new meta. So that's a big question mark for me.
Okay. So I have trouble believing that Complexity received an invite and didn't go. Those guys seem like the kind of people that if you tell them there's a tournament, they're there with bells on. But we can probably assume that EG was invited, maybe turned it down because it's only $100,000. They're TI champs, all that fun stuff. But here's the question. EG has changed the roster. It's 3 of the originals. Yes, they brought back Aoi, but it's a pretty big change. Do you think that they should still be secure in their major invite coming off of the new roster changes without playing these small tournaments to prove their standard, or is it safer for them not to play the small tournaments and get those invites on team name?
It's tough to say that because team name in my mind doesn't matter at all. You could call yourself Fun
Empire
Clubhouse.
going
Doesn't
to
really matter.
ESL Manila.
But it's what it really comes down to is the players, how the roster has tested itself. And unfortunately, in the case of Evil Jesus, there's not going to be a lot of data in this era, in this patch. However, 4 out of 5 of the players won the International 5. So it really just comes down to how Valve values the history of the team versus their current iteration. Because the current iteration is a question mark, but the history is sound. I would say they deserve the invite, but obviously it remains to be seen.
Interesting.
One thing I want to say just quickly about the invites is we do run the risk of perhaps unfairly talking about the tournaments or teams, because here's the thing that we've talked about, the borders being more fluid than ever, and there's a lot of issues where if you have a team that goes to a lot of tournaments, like for example like Complexity does, you have visa issues potentially for different tournaments. So we don't know really about the invite process or what's going on both ends, at least not publicly, but it's quite possible that teams aren't able to make it to these events because they have too much juggling of visas, especially when you have a roster that has players from different places that have different visa requirements. So that could very well be a factor that we're understating here in terms of the teams and the tournaments. And
It's possible, though. I will
I
say
know a
that
lot of players don't want to travel a lot
That's
too.
true.
Like you want to sometimes stay home and play Dota for like a month. I mean, they're gonna go to ESL Manila like once to SEA and then another time. Those are long ass flights, and you don't want to. You're going again, and then again, and then you're just traveling constantly. Sometimes you just want to break too.
Okay. So first, I will say regarding the visa issues, you could be right. I will say most of the teams that don't get are unable to accept invites because of visa issues have been fairly vocal in the past about letting us know, hey, really wanted to be at this tournament, not going to work because of visa issues, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. I will ask you this, though, and Blaze brought this up a minute ago where he said, to me, the brand doesn't matter. You could call yourself whatever you want. At the end of the day, it's the 5 players who play for your team. Again, we talk about, and I don't compare esports to traditional sports in any way, shape, or form, but I do believe that it's worth looking at a standard of competitive play over history's time. Right now, if a team qualifies for an upper level division, for a playoffs position in future years in most sports, but then make trades or lose players, that brand maintains the invite or the qualification. Why are we less open to that, to sort of brands holding invites than players in the current Dota scene?
I mean,
Well, I
we're
think
not.
the biggest thing would be looking at what ESL recently did. They had a rule specifically to go back and say the team gets the invite. The team name, the franchise, whatever, will get an invite to our tournament. And they went back and said, well, it was good they honored their ruling because that was in their rule book, but things have changed. Dota roster scene has changed, and you're going to be seeing that pretty much the dynamics of the team shifts a lot with just a one-player replacement, let alone a majority. So they realized that the player base or the players on the team decided much more than the name behind the team. And in my mind, it's still like a 3 out of 5 rule. Like if you have a majority of players and you have proven individuals on the other two, you can still hold them to a similar scale, but obviously not the exact same level.
Okay, that makes sense.
I was going to discuss the 305 too. As you have to have 60%, and if you replace 3 of the players, everything is just out the window. And what Valve kind of do is, even though you have 2 people that say won the major or won something, let's say you get like Ice or something. Oh, well, he's an amazing player. So they're kind of like saying, well, that kind of like counts as their 3rd, and then you get another big name and then another big name. And so the problem with Valve right now is catering to the bigger names and them coming onto the team, where they're saying like, hey, the rule is still going to be 60% of the team or no, or just so that's my problem.
Fair enough. And I mean, that's something where we can, if we go back to the very first TI, and you guys have all seen Free to Play, right? They talked about, they created TI as a thank you for players, not for organizations. So do you think that configures a little bit into this sort of focus on the makeup of the team instead of the brand of the team? And do you think that that's going to change anytime soon?
I mean, looking back at 2011, deciding what the International's purpose was, I don't think that really translates well into what we're seeing Valve tried to do with their tournament 2016 and onward, what it means for the developer in general. But at the same time, they want to respect the players and they want to showcase what the teams could do. And a team is made up of players. Obviously, the sponsors provide great support opportunities. Sometimes provide coaches or analysts or any other form of stability. Maybe they pay their sub. That's going to be a rarity, I think. But in general, that could be a really great boon for the team as a whole. So I look at that and I say, well, the team means something, but the players still define the team.
So I had a question here. So let's say we have a reshuffle of a team right now, and we take one person from the top, finishing first at the major, and then two people finishing like third, and then two people finishing fifth. And then we all put them on a team. Should that team directly get invited if they're, say, on EG?
So you're saying if you took 5 top players and put them on a team that
and they
recognized
did well at the last majors, should they still get the invite? And they're on a well-known team, but you only have one of the original players.
Okay, so it's one of each. Because like what I was thinking of is like if you get a couple from one team, a couple from another team, and one from that one, then yeah, it's not too bad. It's not a 3 out of 5 rule, but you also have to remember that the other teams that deserve an invite just lost a player, two players.
Yes, they're losing.
So they're that much weaker comparatively, and they deserve an invite slightly less because of their own shuffles. So,
well, and I think that, don't you guys think Secret sort of proved this when they were formed with 5 players that were all phenomenal players, that they sort of immediately just started getting direct invites to everything, and that showed that the scene's willing to support that, even on an unknown brand?
Well, they finished first in every tournament that I know, or a lot of first
But
places.
they never went through open qualifiers to get to those tournaments.
Well,
right?
it's
They got direct invites.
Are you talking about when they first formed?
Yeah. When they first formed, if I remember correctly, they got either direct invites or qualifier invites to every major tournament, and then did really well, obviously. But there was no question of this.
Nobody
is an
runs open qualifiers other than the majors, so they definitely got qualifier invites. But I do remember them having to play through a couple of qualifiers at the very.
I think they had to play through some, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I can't verify.
Fair enough. All right. That said, let's move on to our next topic. This is risk reward. This one I don't know how long it'll go. Thankfully, we have Jack here who might give us some insight as he's watches more of the Chinese scene than I think most of us are able to. Vici made a very interesting, very big play in my opinion, which is they threw caution to the wind, said screw the roster locks, dropped JDAs for Siler. I think it was almost 2 weeks after the locks ended. And now the new roster for Vici Gaming is Siler, CTY, Burning, ROTK, and HYM. That's a pretty mammoth roster. Is this the right choice, the wrong choice, or is it sort of just wait and see?
The sense I've gotten from some people inside the scene, some closer observers, Chinese casters, and even a manager, has been that they were kind of feeling a bit desperate after this reshuffle because things didn't really gel for that squad, and they had to make a change because they weren't even coming through in any of these minor tournaments. And yesterday was the first time I think they played with the new roster against LGD. I believe for WCA 2016 in the group stage, they won both games against LGD. And actually, though it was initially reported that Burning was going to be the offlaner, he played yesterday as the support in both games. And he has experience, I think, in the past playing support. This is way back in the day with City Hunter in the 2000s, I think. And I'm not sure if that happened on eHome as well. I don't think so. So yeah, they have a pretty tough spot, and they really have to recover from losing some of their core players, picking up some new talent. But the support position is pretty hard for them to pin down with all that loss of basically leadership and direction from not having FY and Fenrir around. So that's been tough. They've had to make some changes, and it looks like Burning may be playing support for them. So that's a wait and see right now.
So when is this risk worth it for a team, though, right? Because we've talked about in past shows, I'm sure you guys have talked about it before, the idea that these open qualifiers, especially for majors and DI, are meat grinders. And if you talk to managers of teams and pro players, they'll say, yes, we're better than some people, but it's really anybody's game in the sense of all you have to do is lose one and be done. When does that become worthwhile? For one major player, for a big team shift? Like, what justifies that change?
And I think it depends on the team, depends on the situation, depends on that desperation level that Jack talked about a little bit. It really comes down to, like, I talked to Brax a little bit about this recently, and essentially the being forced to go through open qualifiers is not as big of a deal as a lot of people try to make it out to be, Reddit or whoever. And in an interesting sense, 6 months ago, I said the exact opposite, but I think the ideas have shifted a lot. 6 months ago, everybody's like, oh yeah, whatever, just go through open qualifiers, the roster lock doesn't matter. And 2 teams proved that was very incorrect. I think it was Archon and Sneaky Nick's Assassins had troubles with it. A kick turned into a failed run through the open quals, and turned into a lack of a qualifier opportunity. And there are certain teams and certain play styles that will be stronger in best of one, like the South American Huskar pickers were able to do a lot of work in those North American qualifiers, because open qualifiers, because of just how easy it is to lose one game.
Yeah.
How it's like, okay, if you learn from that and ban it, you can win the next two. But in a best of one open qualifier run, there is a lot of risk. That being said, people act like that's a death run, like just marching through a gauntlet, and it's actually still obviously a skill-based game. I feel like there's more balance and less fringe picks than there were 3 to 6 months ago. So I feel like best of ones are not the end of the world. And while I feel like the open qualifier run was underrated as a threat 6 months ago, now it's a bit overrated by the general populace.
Yeah, I don't think it's a big deal for me either when you're going to the open qualifier. My biggest concern right now is when you go to the next step. I don't think they're trying to solve everything before the majors, and you want to look more past that. It's not just the majors. It's for the TI, the international. That's the biggest thing. You still have the majors as, that's 3 million, but you still could have this next tournament, the next TI be like 30 million. And you want to make sure everything is geared towards that. And if you have to change your roster midway before you're going into the TI qualifier or open, like where you're getting invited, and then now you start turning some heads, even if you don't win or get in to the next major, as long as you start winning tournaments and you start gelling as a team and they can still come together for the invites to the international, I think that matters way more right now than just this major. So I would like to see them do really well.
But do you think VG, without this roster change, with the roster of, it would have been JDH, CTY, Burning, ROTK, and him, or HYM, would they have been up for a TI invite?
I mean, it's just Jack said it clearly. If you don't have leadership on your team, it doesn't matter who you play with. If nobody wants to make shot calls, if nobody wants to talk in the game, you're just going to be 5 heads just running around the map, playing a pub, playing silent, and it's not going to be beneficial to anybody. So you have to make a change, and best now than just wait until you get you don't even qualify for the major, or you can't even go to TI because everybody just hates each other or something. So
I might have to soapbox here, actually. I like Ryu's point about TI, because with the reshuffle here, we have the difference being that you now are locked through TI as well, right? So if you're going to make changes, if the open qualifier versus playing in the main qualifier is the difference, in this case, if you're Vici, I think you take that, because if you have a team that isn't confident, isn't looking good going into the main qualifier for, say, the next major, then you're a very good chance of just not making that event in general, right? So you want to make those changes and figure that out as soon as possible, because you have to play through both events. Now, in terms of open qualifiers, yes, we did see that situation in the past, and China's a very strong region as well. So certainly BO1s could be quite tough for them. Although I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it goes to BO3 as soon as you reach the semifinals of the open qualifiers, and there's 2 of them. So they might be reasoning, if we're weighing something against playing in the main qualifier with the roster we don't like versus playing through open qualifier with a roster that we can like, and now the pressure's off us to maintain that old roster because we can keep making changes now from here going forward for TI and for the Manila Major and beyond, then it probably becomes worth it for them to try to experiment and find some kind of fit to make that work.
They got 2 chances now, 2 chances.
So here's now, along the 2 chances thing, let me ask you this, and I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if maybe you guys have heard. From what I understand, when you shift your roster outside of the lock period, it means that you are no longer eligible for a direct invite to a major event. That said, if VG, who's got a very strong roster right now, makes it through qualifiers to the major and performs in the top 4 at the next major, do you think that roster lock issue still applies to them at TI, or can they be directly invited?
It would completely defeat the point of the roster lock. The roster lock specifically states how the ruling works. It specifically says that it goes for both Manila and for TI, and even if they get undefeated streak through the Manila Major, best everybody, make a 20-minute game, stomp everybody, the rules should still stand for Valve. That's the point of the roster lock. And the second that you start disobeying your own rules for the roster lock, the second they start becoming completely irrelevant. People just know that they're involved in the qualifier decision and the open qualifier factors. And I wouldn't really abide by that. As far as the previous comments on how the kind of last second shift, how it affects their chances of actually going through the tournament run, I think obviously the previous lineup wasn't working the way that they needed to. And more importantly, like every team looks at the upcoming tournament and they say, we don't want to get third place at the qualifier. So if you feel like you're in VG Gaming's shoes, like we can be invited directly to the tournament, but we can't be sure that we're not going to be taking third or fourth place, then you got to make that change. There's no question about it. The captain needs that shift. And I feel like that's going to be the deciding factor, is whether or not you feel like you can make top 2 with that roster. If you can, then go for it. Don't risk the invite. If you cannot, then please reconsider, because it's obviously not going to work in this tournament and even further in the next one as the problems continue to amass.
It's going to be very interesting to see how the roster lock works if they do get top 4.
Well, there's the questions. Let's
that's gonna be so big.
Let's bring up Blaze's scenario and say that they go banana Jones and they burn their way through the major. They finish not even top 4. They finish in the grand final. They win the grand final. And then the invites come out for TI and they're left off as an open qualifier team. Is the backlash going to be significant? I mean, will that ultimately change the way that roster locks work going forward, potentially?
I think the backlash will at first just be about how the invites and stuff like that, the fact that they didn't get invited, Valve should make an exception. And then, I don't know, 12 hours later or a day later, people will realize the problem isn't the roster lock system. It's just the fact that there were 2 big tournaments in one lock. Right. Manila Major and TI. And people will say every single one has to be separate. That's the bottom line. Is if there's a problem with it, if we see through the Manila Major that a team, an unlocked team, gets the credentials that would justify an invite, then people will just start advocating for splitting up the lock periods and making
I would rather it go to 6 months for one lock and 6 months for another lock. I would agree with that. I don't want a 3-3-3-3 at all. I want the scene to be more stable and punish the people who want to go through open qualifiers, like what they're doing right now. Say other teams don't want to do it either, and they feel like they can get an easy trip through the qualifier, and nobody's going to contest them. So you have to lock it down. We want to see the scene grow. 6 months for each one, just to make sure everybody is on page. You're not going to change teams. If you do, the consequences are going to be very severe, very severe. And like going back to the point, they finished first. No, they should still not be invited. They still have to go through the open qualifiers.
Well, this brings it back full circle, actually, to the invite process that you're talking about, because we spoke earlier, Ryuu brought this up, and I think David as well, about how do you invite a team to the next major? Like, to what extent do you give automatic invites to teams that finish well at the previous major? So let's say that Vici, as in the scenario we mentioned, they finish top 4, do really well in Manila, right? So they would still not qualify under the provision of being a non-roster lock team for the TI invite, but would they qualify on the basis of doing well at the major before TI, that being Manila? So would they potentially be invited on that basis? And that goes back to other things too. From their perspective, I mean, they're not really sure how many Chinese teams are going to get to the Manila major, and that makes that main qualifier field more stacked than ever. And so it's just a really tough situation for them to figure that out. And that definitely tilts the risk reward, because they're thinking, hey, no matter what, if we get to the main qualifiers, it's going to be an absolute battle. So we have to be ready now.
So it sounds like the moral of the story is Valve is hoping VG doesn't do very well at the major.
I suppose. I mean, that's kind of the whole Valve transparency thing is, well, what if you get in a gotcha scenario? What if you place a rule that the top 4 get an auto invite, and you also place a rule that the roster lock teams never get an invite, and then this stuff starts getting contradicted, you get worried about it. So the only ruling they've placed, the only thing they've stated publicly is on the FAQ of the roster registration site, and that comes down to just it would be a null and void point. But while we're still a little bit on the topic of the ruling of roster locks, I do want to talk a little bit more about like the whole thing that happened with Secret and the last minute changes, and how that is an extremely exploitable system that not only allows you to get the team that you want at
the
any
top tier team in the world,
roster lock, but you get to take it away from your opponents. Right. You get to take EG and take out 2 amazing talents from them, and hope that they don't even come up with something in the last 5 days. But of course, EG Money has it covered. But I think obviously a lot of people advocated for it. The solution would be a removal period and then an add period, or sorry, add and remove, and then only add. And what I would say is like halfway between the conclusion of the previous major and the roster lock period, 50-50, halfway through, you can remove players. And then as soon as you pass that line, then suddenly you can only add players or make a brand new team. And
So
that would
Let me ask you this, and we've heard this brought up, the idea of sort of a double lock timeline. Why it doesn't it seem like moving to a club-based system could make this significantly easier to deal with?
Oh,
I mean, no.
no.
In every other sport, if you want to hire a player, you speak with the club that they signed the contract with, get approval for a trade, and then negotiate it. And there's built-in free agent periods in which those players have to negotiate with clubs. Do you think
But who's going to regulate that? You look at ACE, you look at everything that happened in China over the past several years. You have to look at the fact that players had to fake retirement just to get an easier transfer to another team. Like, you don't want that. You just, I don't feel like there's anybody that's suited to regulate that and that can have a proof of concept for that to actually be working effectively. And Val certainly don't want that on their hands.
Okay, I'll give that to you. Any last thoughts on this topic? It's time to move on to the next one. Gentlemen?
That's kind of where the boundaries come in. And, we talked about this before about how different an environment we're in now, because you don't have, as David mentioned, that kind of like domestic or based like league in a set location where you have all those rules and regulations. It becomes very difficult to do that sort of thing. And yeah, obviously it's a tough situation, but at the same time, you can see that you can treat the end of basically every major, every tournament as a soft drop where everyone is basically being dropped from their teams. And if you're a player, we talk about players being like having a lot of power and decision-making authority in this scene right now. If you're a player and your place on a team is uncertain, it behooves you to kind of find out, like, where do I stand? Or can you add me and submit this roster now so that I know that I'm here? Otherwise, I have some inkling that things might go wrong. So there kind of is a drop system. It's just not as solidified as some people have suggested, but there is a drop. You just assume that those rosters are not being submitted until they're told otherwise, and they have been.
That would be really cool if you could go to like a website, see all the teams, and then like you said, they're all dropped, and then you're like waiting every day to see, okay, who is being re-added? Okay, I want to see who's re-added. Please tell me it's him. Please tell me it's him.
Just have a live thread going for all the drama. Oh my god.
I would feed Reddit.
Reddit would feed itself. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. Let's keep in line with this Starladder trend we've been going with. A big thing is happening at the Starladder Invitational, and that is the return of The Voice. For those of you who don't know who The Voice is, someone that was dubbed the voice of Dota early on is none other than AC himself, the Golden Voice, known for his play-by-play casting. He was gone for almost a year and a half now, it feels like, and is making a big comeback at this tournament. Here's my question for you. You guys have all worked in the industry for a long time. You've worked on panels, you've been to LANs, you've seen these events firsthand. What does AC need to do to make sure he is ready for a new brand of Dota 2? We learned from 2GD and the debacle in Shanghai that business as usual a year and a half, 2 years ago, doesn't fly in the new Dota world.
I mean, I don't know if that's the most accurate comparison because honestly, the issue with James was a stylistic, a personality issue. JC's not going to be hosting a panel. He's going to be casting a game. And I feel like those jobs have so many differences that it's just hard to even list it off. You just have to kind of jump into the casting seat and try to answer some questions. How much has he been watching the game? How much has he been playing the game? How much has he been paying attention to the patch notes? I mean, I don't know how much he cares if he gets flamed for not knowing a Naganim Scepter upgrade and fully and what it does, but like that kind of stuff will happen a lot if you haven't been paying attention to the past couple of major patches. Other than that, obviously his biggest issue in the past that a lot of people hit on was the fact that he didn't give his co-casters enough space. So Ryuu, speak up a little bit. Hopefully we'll get some good analytical dialogue going along with that. And I think that he has the potential to I don't even know if he's really trying to make a comeback in the scene. He's very busy with his Twitch work, but if he wants to, he definitely has the pipes for it.
Yeah, I think you can't make the comparison like he said, just because James is totally different personality, and it's not a good subject to really touch on. And he's just gonna be a casting game. And Blaze pretty much said everything about AC that touches up on him. He needs to just not talk and sound too intelligent unless he's done his research. If he does his due diligence, he does his research, and he knows at least what's going on with the meta or with just certain heroes that he's talking about, then that's going to be fine. And he's just going to he might have to give the co-caster, if that's me or whoever, a lot more leadway to talk about the things in the game. And he's just going to have to bring his A game, like when he casts. That's going to be the next thing. Is like, you haven't cast for such a long time. are you going to be rusty? Are you going to be stumbling on your words? Because I know when I first started, I stumble. I still stumble. I still need to get a lot more practice under my belt. So I'm actually doing really good in pronouncing everything correctly. But I mean, he used to be a radio star.
Right.
He used to do that job. I mean, he still has the pipes, I'm pretty sure.
One thing I loved about James when he talked about his preparation to host for the major was that he has a similar situation in the sense that obviously not as a host, but that he was re-entering the scene and kind of getting back into Dota maybe after not being as involved with it. And he said that he kind of leveraged that to his advantage by using the whiteboard, for example, to throw it around to the other analysts. And I think we have better analysts now in the scene than ever before, so they can do a lot of that. Obviously, maybe more than before when AC first started to help him out in that sense. And also he can leverage things like that to let the analyst shine and at the same time make up for whatever gaps in knowledge he might have about the game if he's not fully caught up to speed, just like James did. So I think that there's a thread there.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely think that he should rely as heavily on his analysts as possible to enable him and to kind of show what's going on in the game and show them how smart they can be, etc. But there was one last thing, and I just blanked my mind. But
I hate when that happens. I'm thinking here sometimes too, and I'm like, damn, it's hot right now, and I'm just like, whew.
So while you're thinking of your blank,
think-
I do want to address real quick. KBBQ brought up an interesting topic, the idea that you can leverage analysts more than in the past. And I feel like if we've learned anything from recent events, it's that yes, analysts are better and you can leverage them, but it feels like the community doesn't accept that as an excuse for a lack of preparation on your own part. How do you think that's true, or do you think that AC could show up with the pipes and that'd be good enough for everybody?
All right, I'll give you a real quick thing. If you know 9 out of 10 things, it won't matter if you get that 1 out of 10 thing completely wrong. That's what the problem with the community is. If you say you don't know one thing out of 100, you just get completely flamed and you're like useless, stupid, or whatever. So people just need to realize that, hey, not everybody knows every single thing about Dota, and that's the problem where they want you to know everything. You're the analyst. I recently, Blaze helped me out a month ago knowing some different things with Tusk and OD. Ags on Lone Druid, I didn't even know that when you bought it, you keep the Lone Druid alive when you die. So there's so many things that I learn every day when I cast, and AC hasn't been there for such a long time. I just feel so bad for the guy that he can potentially get flamed for not knowing a lot of things.
But I feel like that also gives him a small advantage when it comes down to Reddit feedback and stuff like that. I don't know if it's going to go full circle, and by the end of the tournament, they'll turn their heads again. But initially, people will look at it and just say, this guy's back. This guy hasn't been in the scene for forever. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I honestly think that at least initially, the majority of the viewers will give him the benefit of the doubt. If he's casted the grand final and slumdogging it up, I don't know. But
LD is, all right, I can't tell you guys, LD is not casting the final, so we'll have to see who's casting it.
Interesting. Leaks for days. And I think that you guys are probably right. If you go to Reddit right now, on the front page is a thread called I Dream of Being a Caster, in which Pyrian Flax put up a post that was really upvoted that said, it doesn't matter if you're 3.2K as a hype caster, as long as you don't act like you know everything about the game and you trust your analyst. Do you think that I would say this, 6 months ago, that wasn't nearly as popular an idea. It seems to have grown, though. Is that in part to the high caliber of analysts that are now available on a regular basis? The idea that a play-by-play caster can literally get by asking questions instead of making statements?
My closest analogy to this is that it kind of becomes its own skill. I mean, for example, I follow professional basketball or any mainstream professional sport, and it's like, you have one person who's an analyst, who's a former professional, who has lots of in-game knowledge and all that, and you have another person who maybe never played the game competitively or doesn't know that much about the game in the sense of being first person as a player or competitor. So in that sense, that person's skill set is based on being able to deliver and help set up the analyst and make everything entertaining and interesting and streamline it versus having that knowledge. And I think more than ever, that should be the case.
It kind of ties all in together because, since you directly referenced the thread, the number of the guys in MMR is low, but the bigger thing is how he felt about his game knowledge and how his mechanics and how those were completely different things. It's like, oh, I can't click buttons, but I can talk. And while that can potentially be true, a lot of people will Dunning-Kruger that, and they'll say, well, I know mechanics like crazy, but I'm just slow. Well, if you're slow, then how are you going to play by play? Because you can't see ultimates flying out left and right. You can't really process all the information that's happening in a fight if you can't react to it with a right click, with whatever. So I feel like still a lot of Dota skill translates directly to casting and ability to process the information and send it back out. Obviously, it's not completely tied together, but I do feel like there's a bar there where it's like you have to expect your play-by-play commentator to still bring a certain amount of quick reaction, quick processing time, and obviously understanding of what everything does to the bottom line.
Fair enough. All right. That is about the time that I have for topics today. So we'll move to the lightning round. And what we're going to do in the lightning round is I'm going to ask a question to each of you. And you each get about a minute to just talk or give me your opinions on it. It's sort of like a mini soapbox, but one that I am driving forward and I'm picking for you. So the mini soapbox we're going to talk about today is actually just out of the news. Some of you probably even dealt with it. And that is getting tickets to TI. So basically, they changed the way that the tickets were distributed, and hold on a second, I got distracted. So they changed the way that they were distributed. They're now distributed in two parts, weekdays and weekends. A lot of people couldn't get their hands on tickets because there was issues with Ticketmaster. There are problems where people who wanted both got one and not the other. Is that something that could be laid at the feet of Valve, or is this just something that you should come to expect from a live event, no matter what the industry is? We'll start out.
Hey.
Go ahead, Ryuu, lay it on me.
Yes, nice. I got it. All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, you guys could took it if you really wanted to, but I want to just kind of sell it here. Okay, so I did a blog about a year and a half ago after I did TI4. I said that eventually Valve should still expand to another stadium or something, because you have around the world lots of people that want to come to this one event. You have so many, I'm pretty sure, Chinese fans that want to come. You have people in Europe, probably rich as all hell, want to come see this. I mean, Team Secret, he could bring his whole family, bring the whole house, bring whatever he wants. But this is the biggest thing in the world, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. You can't stay at the same venue. You saw the problem with Benaroya, and it's becoming the same problem once again for this stadium here. So you have to expand. I made a big claim to maybe like the Dallas Stadium, but they don't need to go that far. They should stay in Seattle. Try to rent out a dome there or something. They just need to expand more and just do something bigger, because there's not enough places. It's just not enough places for how many people that want to attend the event.
All right, that's the time for your lightning round. We're going to move over to Jack now. It's the same rough topic: ticket disaster, ticket distribution. Would they make the right choices? And now you can actually address Ryuu if you want and say, is Superdome the next choice for Dota 2, or are we already too big in Seattle? Go.
I'm not sure about venue-wise. I think one of the major concerns of that thread coming out is that this is usually going to be the case, but you'd rather have a fan or someone who wants to go to the game instead of a scalper get your hands on the tickets, right? So maybe you could have some kind of system if you have to go through the current arena, and if the arena isn't the issue because there are all kinds of logistical problems with moving around and such, is you could have some kind of system where you can get those tickets, say, from Ticketmaster, or Valve can get them, and then you can have a way to distribute them then through Valve, because they do have some of that hardware in place where, maybe we could do a system where it's like, hey, by however many years you've played this game, or if you're going to tie things to accounts, or how many hours you've been in the game or something like that. Reward people, or maybe it's commands or low priority or something like that, where you're rewarding people who are the fans and long-lasting fans of your game who want to go live in person to this tournament for a week or two, which those people are likely to be anyway. And find a way to reward them and ensure that they can get the tickets or get it first in kind of a tiered, release system. And maybe that takes away a little bit from some of the scalpers and from some of the other purchasing headaches that people are getting in that scramble.
A tiered release system. Interesting.
Can I say something real quick, or do we have to wait for Blaze?
I mean, I'll give you a few seconds. What do you got?
My problem with that was, how can you give it to people that say want to bring their girlfriend or want to bring their, like, say they want to go with a group of fans, their family? Then it's hard to say, like, hey, you have all this achievement in your Dota 2, and I love that you're giving the respect to it, but then what happens to your friends, your family?
It would definitely create some interesting problems that I think all of us see. There'd be issues with that of, well, if you don't give it to low prio players, what if somebody says, well, I'm only there because my so-and-so hated the way that I played and I didn't deserve to get low prio. Why can't I go to TI? It's an interesting idea. It definitely seems like it would not be met with the
hard
best
to
reception.
implement.
Absolutely.
Well, you still have that problem now, right? Because there's a certain number of tickets that you can buy for each slot that you're getting from Ticketmaster. So it's, you still have that issue now, but let's say
it's not your turn, Jack. David, it's your minute. Start when you are ready.
All right, so we have Key Arena tied to essentially Ticketmaster. If they wanted to sell it through the Steam store, they have a marketplace to do so. They probably would have done that. So they're kind of, with Key Arena, they have to do Ticketmaster. Ticketmaster sucks. Obviously, the ideal thing for weekends and weekdays is that you bundle the stuff together. They advertised they would do that, but a lot of glitches on the sites made that difficult. So the problem really is that Ticketmaster sucks because bundling makes it fine for weekday weekend, in my opinion. The problem is, if you want to move away from Key Arena, you don't really have many alternatives in Washington. The only thing is Tacoma Dome is like 5,000 more capacity, and that's really just not going to cut it. So it really comes down to whether they want to expand dramatically or whether they want it to be close enough where Valve could have a heavy influence, because their time is very valuable, and Valve do a great job with the tournament. It's just how accessible it is for them to lend their expertise and to contribute to the international instead of pretty much paying somebody else to do it for them.
All right, that was a good minute. So, and I will say this: a lot of people already complain. Did any of you go to TI 1, 2, or 3? Okay. So, from the people that I know who attended the early TIs, the general consensus is Key Arena is way less personal, not nearly as much fun. It's just too big for an event with a community like this. And I wonder if the Superdome or something massive, even on a larger scale, would begin to contribute some sort of more issues to that sort of running it, operations, etc. Kind of hard to tell.
All right, I want to take my minute.
All right, take it. So Ryu's got a minute. Soapbox, when you're ready, start.
All right, so when you have the bigger domes, you have bigger accesses to VIPs and to areas that can be reserved for the special people, the special guests, the families, the what's not. And the thing that brings everybody together is still going to be Dota. It's still going to be the atmosphere of Dota. And having just even more people screaming in my ears, I would definitely enjoy it. And I would just love to see that more. And like Blaze said, it's really hard to do it in Seattle. That's why maybe bring it somewhere else. I don't know if California has a bigger dome. I have to check that out. Like the Oakland Raiders went down there, or the football stadiums. It's just really hard to relocate, like he was talking about. But I think it needs to be done, and I just hope Valve do it.
Fair enough. All right. So that's the soapbox. If nobody else wants to take theirs, we will wrap this bad boy up. That is the end of the game. The final score count is as follows. In third place on his first appearance on the show is Korean Barbecue Dota, or KBBQ, if I don't know if you go by full Korean Barbecue anymore or not. He is coming in at 25 points, so a very respectable third place finish. For Jack, second place is going to be given to Ryuu Dota at 29, and first place to Blaze Casting, who came in at 34. So you'll get your 1 minute and your Aegis in just a second. And then we'll go through and talk to everybody one more time and to get updates on what you're up to, where we can watch you, and so on and so forth. So Blaze, congratulations on winning your Aegis. You have 1 minute to talk about anything you damn well please. What do you choose to talk about?
Well, I mean, Dota 2 as a scene is growing. It's amazing. It's been amazing to work in, and I'm looking at the future. I'm thinking, okay, well, how can we make this bigger? Or do we want to bring it to the big arenas? Do we want to have every single tournament be packed stadiums and lighting up the media left and right? I mean, obviously, that's the long-term future of esports. They're going to be as big as the physical sports, and probably within this decade, definitely within the 2 decades. So it's very rapidly growing. It's very fun to be a part of, and I just want everybody to be open to the idea that means it becomes mainstream, and that means that all the internet memes and everything that everybody likes to condense into a bubble, that bubble bursts, and people are going to be coming in that never play maybe they played a few video games, maybe they played Pac-Man, but they want to get into it as a spectator, even though they're not familiar with internet culture, but familiar with all the games. And I think that the most important thing is that we learn to adapt. Dota players have to adapt to the game. Well, let's adapt out of the game and try to welcome everybody who wants to be a part of the esports phenomenon.
I dig it, man. I could not agree with that more. I think that was very well said. In fact, I'll leave it with this thought. I don't know if you guys probably know this. I teach at a local school periodically. I'm sort of a building sub there when I'm not doing my other stuff. And I've heard kids who don't play video games and have said that because I ask them when I hear this, use words like Kappa and memes that are part of our Twitch culture regularly as part of their just vocabulary, and I find that very, very interesting. That said, guys, it was a great show. Let's start with Jack and work our way across. Jack, where can we find you, and what are you working on right now?
I'm on Twitter at KBBQ Dota, but I want to put a plug mainly out to at .p_show, Defense of the Patients. They have a podcast network that's been growing and doing pretty well. We have something for everyone, from newer players and more casual players to people who want some observations on the professional scene. So be sure to check them out on Twitter at .p_show.
Awesome. Ryuu, where can we find you, and what are you up to?
You can follow me at Ryuu Dota on Twitter, as well as my Facebook at Ryuu Dota, or just Ryuu Dota. And then you can see me here working at the Star Ladder Invitational, or the Jacobs Invitational, as Toffee said, here this weekend coming up. So it's going to be very interesting how I do, how I perform. I'm going to bust. I'm going to be hopefully doing really well, and hope everybody watches me, supports me. And if I do mess up, I'll take the flame, and then I'll take your criticisms, and I would like to hear them.
All right, so looking forward to seeing a positive Reddit thread for Ryuu as he goes to this LAN. Good luck to you there. I think this is a big thing for you, Ryuu, and I'm very excited to see it finally happening. Blaze, where can we find you, and what are you working on?
Well, I'm at Blaze Casting on Twitter. Obviously, I do a lot of freelance commentary, join Dota, BTS, whoever, and that's always fun. Try to bring some analytical commentary, and you can find me on pretty much any of those major streams for that kind of stuff. Often on the off hours, SEA China. It's a lot of fun. But other than that, doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work for BTS, and doing more in the future, you can be sure.
Awesome, guys. Make sure you check out all of our guests. My name is Toffees. You can find me at Toffees TV. Doing shows on the regular, so make sure you follow me to see what's coming up next. We should be back with another episode on Sunday, as well as a new episode of True Sight over on the Daily Dot this Wednesday. Big shout out to our sponsors, Razer, Asus, Republica Gamers, and Pro Built Systems for making the show possible. We couldn't do it without them. And obviously, the biggest shout out to you guys who are watching and to the guests, because without any of you, that would just be me bored talking to myself. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for watching. And as always, Toffees out.